nexus of the thing we're talking about is, that a lot of, you know, there's a lot of doing stuff by gut, or people have intuitions about what might work, or, some thought leaders have like rules about what works with respect to, content gating and, the customer journey. And rather than just going by gut, or going by intuition or whatever someone's rule is, you can be intelligent about using data, experimentation, to test your way through this problem, and also, um, and have it also kind of, uh, build a foundation for measurement that allows you to get to, predictive revenue, multi-touch attribution, like all of the more sort of sophisticated ways of doing stuff.
Yeah, that sounds good. Like, I think what's at least in the first part, like what stands out to me with that, Arun, is the thought leader aspect, where we do see a lot of thought leaders, especially on LinkedIn, like making these almost global assumptions and positions about certain things. And obviously, with our background in CRO, we now approach really everything we do with the experimentation lens. And there is no one size fits all solution. So it's about experimentation, lightweight experiments, and kind of piece by piece figuring out what's going to work best for like any given business.
So let's take the content gating like part of that. So this argument pops up all the time on like LinkedIn and other places. Like there are two camps for content gating. One, people say you should never gate anything and keep all your content ungated. And the other camp says you should gate all of your content, because how else are you going to capture the lead and nurture them and sell to them and blah blah blah. Like what's the reasoning behind both of those in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to people just in a general level. Like, people feel really pressured, especially in the thought leader space, to be the experts. And that's why, it's not that anyone is wrong with some of these approaches. It's just that they're taking a stand, which for, personal brand aspect, I suppose makes sense. But yeah, again, like, it's not right or wrong, but it's kind of somewhere in between. It's a moving line or something.
And I think one of the things that's missed with just taking a stance, a dogmatic stance about this, is that like the B2B customer journey is complex, right? So you've got people who don't have real purchase intent landing on your site, and they might want to, check out some of the content that you have just to learn a little bit more. The barrier to entry to gate that is just too high, right? They don't have purchase intent. If you're not going to share anything about you without me having to fill out a form, well, I'm going to bounce and find a competitor that will. And that's a lot different than that bottom of the funnel visitor that has high intent, is high value, showing, motions that they might want to buy, or at least engage in a sales conversation. Uh, for them, they might be much more willing to do that. So there's a lot of nuance here that's lost by taking a stand, a black or white stand on this issue.
Exactly. And I think it comes from a place of individual growth practitioners. They kind of want some of these problems just solved. They want the plug and play solution. So if someone is putting out like, hey, ungate all your content, great. Like, yeah, but let's totally do that. And being more nuanced with it can maybe seem a little overwhelming and more challenging. But it doesn't have to be, right? It's just like iteration in the crow space and in conversion rate optimization, where like piece by piece we'll uncover some things and move, and you can move towards this like end goal, rather than just slapping the thing on there.
So how would you like test your way through this? Would it be, test ungating versus gating everything? Would you do it by funnel stage, by segment? Like what are the ways to think about this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. It's very hard to answer. So, if we're removing like some of the deeper discussion points from our what we want to talk about today regarding like predictive revenue and things of that nature, and we're just talking about our content offers, top of funnel offers, like are we going to gate or ungate them? It's yeah, it's challenging for me. I don't know if I even know all the pieces, mainly due to the measurement side of things. Like if we're going to ungate all the content, how are we actually measuring the efficacy of that to revenue? Like it's very hard to attribute that if we're just all the content is ungated. But with some of these like the more iterative approach, look, the way everyone's ever done it in B2B lead gen is all the content is gated. And normally, depending on the size of the business, it might be a pretty robust lead form that's blocking you from that content, especially with enterprise level. They're asking all sorts of details, team size, phone number, all of that, just so you can read some white paper or such. So I would start really simply trying to understand first of all the quality of these leads. Is sales actually following up with them? Do they need that level of information? What we're often seeing is that's not the case. Like these content download leads, as we can call them, maybe kind of lower intent. They're not getting a direct sales touch right after the submission. Yeah, there's some lead scoring and potentially a sales touch later on. So I would probably lead with just simplifying the form experience, and with the hypothesis of, is friction a lever here? If we have a really long form, we're creating a lot of friction for the user to get maybe an opinion piece we're putting out in a white paper. This isn't certainly not going to change their life. Maybe it will, like whatever the content piece is. So if we're able to make it a little easier for them to get to that without completely ungating it, I would start there, removing some of these additional fields and just measuring overall kind of top of funnel submits. That would be like the first step.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple points there. One, the idea of using gating as a way to measure intent and add a little bit of friction in the journey and see if there truly is intent there. And does that provide signal as to the quality of that lead is an interesting one. I think there are also different kinds of gates as well from a purely UX perspective. It's not just fill the form and see the content. Things like the teaser gates, or our clients that are using Path Factory, where there's actually like a soft gate in the content piece itself, like lets you experiment with different methods of gating. And this includes progressive profiling as well, where maybe initially you only ask for like a simple piece of information, but over time, if that visitor is coming back and showing more and more interest and intent in your service or product, you start asking them for more information. These are ways to still get some of that information and thread that needle between, engaging that visitor and that audience that you don't want to lose because you put up too many barriers, but also getting the information that you need to be able to sell to them and measure the efficacy of that content on revenue.
Yeah, I'm actually glad. Yeah, it's a great point. Glad you added that, Arun. Like it's there's so many different mechanisms. There's not going to be a one size fits all approach for everyone, but there's a lot of these like smaller things you can do, the smaller pieces that again will kind of lead to like the bigger picture. But soft gating, teaser gates, things like that. So good addition.
Yeah. So then let me get to this idea that, especially in this day and age, if you can get your data right with, all of the AI tools available and opportunities to personalize, you can actually make this whole thing smarter, right? So certainly you can test your way through this a little bit, but recognizing that, different visitors and different prospects and leads are different stages of the journey. You can be smarter about, what you gate and ungate and how you score and how you measure the efficacy of the content. So one of the things that our clients have been doing is content engagement scoring. And obviously there's also lead and account scores and really thinking through how those things come together. Because you're right, there can be a big gap between people that just come around and download white papers versus the ones that actually show up and buy. And if you're actually like able to score and measure those things and look at the impact of your content on account engagement, on propensity to convert to opportunity, close one revenue, then you can make some decisions about the effect that that content has, where it actually sits in the journey, and how much it influences sales, which is ultimately what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and this is something I always get a little lost on. So I'm curious, Arun, like when it comes to lead scoring, like we all have the end goal of what that looks like. Is there like what does an iterative approach look like to lead scoring so we don't make perfection the enemy of good enough in rolling something like this out?
I mean, it starts with the data that you have. So ultimately, what you're trying to do with a lead score is put a number against the likelihood to convert. Now, the ideal end goal of that is actually put an expected revenue value, which is predictive, using all of the data that you have, based on historical data, but also, making a future-looking prediction on how much revenue that lead or account, if it's an account predictive revenue, will drive. Now, that doesn't happen on day one for most organizations. Data's messy, don't always have the historical numbers. You don't have your enrichment pipeline set up correctly. So you got to start small and start with what you do have and do some exploratory data analysis, right? What is actually, what information do I have in my CRM that actually signals that this is a high intent lead, high value lead, high potential revenue opportunity. And typically you want to break that down by, fit, which is, how well does the lead or account fit what we're trying to, our ideal customer profile. And then the second component of that is intent. So if you can sort of establish some baseline of fit and intent and roll that up into a score, you're in a pretty good place. And obviously tools like Sixth Sense and other predictive ABM type of B2B or ABM type of tools help with this. But that's kind of a quick way that you can get there. But I think the important thing is make sure you have a closed loop system so you're able to validate and run experiments on the efficacy of that. So if you're rolling out a new score, take a subset of your reps or take a subset of your process and test that new score against it and see if it actually performs better versus what your baseline is. And if you kind of iterate your way through that, you can over time get more sophisticated with it.
So it seems to me that predictive revenue, this predictive revenue function is kind of like the North Star that everyone should, not should, but could be moving towards. Let's assume like a given B2B company, they have some semblance of lead scoring. I think most do. Are there like high level 3 to 5 steps that are kind of in order to move them towards this predicted revenue outcome?
Well, the data collection is really important, right? So, lead scoring a lot of times is done in a deterministic way. So if they come to the site, if they engage with certain content, they get a certain number of points, they cross a threshold and they become an MQL. Or they raise their hand and fill out a form and they become an MQL. And when you're taking a predictive approach, you're actually you want to start with collecting, making sure you have all the touch points that you can collected and seeing which of those actually truly influence pipeline or revenue, whatever your main KPI is. So if you can do that and establish the right data collection, then you should be able to, using a bit of analysis, figure out, which content, which channels, which types of visitors, which campaigns actually drove qualified leads, and use that to create an initial scoring model. If you can do that, get the data collection right, and identify what's actually influencing those outcomes, you can build simple scoring models and start there and then iterate on and improve on it over time.
Got it. So what you're saying is start with an audit of sorts, do some exploratory data analysis, and then get to a good enough kind of scoring mechanism that it can then be improved upon and layered on.
Yeah, and as long as, again, the importance of a closed loop system can't be understated here, right? Just because you create a score or what you think is a better score, if you're not able to run experiments and tie that back to outcomes and report on the efficacy of it, you're kind of going to spin your wheels, right? You're never going to be able to sort of iterate and figure out if it's actually working for you, or you need to go back to the drawing board and try it again. So whatever scoring you come with, it's only as good as your ability to uh, experiment and iterate and measure the results of it.
And I think most will probably know, but can you define a closed loop versus an open loop system in this context?
Sure. A closed loop system in the context of scoring would be, we looked at the data, we came up with a new scoring system, and we're going to roll it out to everyone and, cross your fingers and hope it works. A closed loop system is what we think of as an experiment. So it always starts with a hypothesis, and you have a bunch of hypotheses that ultimately roll up into your new lead or account scoring. But then you're actually feeding back the results of an experiment that tests those hypotheses to the outcomes. You're feeding the results back, and you're trying to determine, was the change that you're making, in this case, the new scoring system, did it actually can you prove causality to the hypothesis? So can you gather evidence that the new scoring system actually influenced the outcomes that you care about? And if you can do that, great. You've got a closed loop system and you can iterate on that. So the important thing across, all of the funnel optimization that you might do, website experiments, lead scoring, whatever it is making sure you're building these incremental closed loop systems that you can build upon and improve over time.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think a portion of our audience will have a background of CRO, website experimentation. I think everyone's familiar with the experimentation loop, feedback mechanisms, and it seems like this is the same thing. It's the same concept, but we're just applying it to really all growth efforts and all business decisions.
Yeah, in for many CRO practitioners, we're familiar with the experimentation loop, but it often gets caught up in the concept of A/B testing, right? And the only way you can get there is through an A/B test, and that's just not true because it's not practical for a lot of organizations, especially B2B organizations. Maybe you have the traffic on your site and you can run A/B tests, but maybe you don't, and you have to do another type of experiment, like a pre-post experiment, and that's the website. But if you look at other places in the funnel, like your new scoring methodology or your new lead management process, you can still run experiments there. You might have to structure them differently. You might not get as much data as you can collect on the website, but you can still run experiments, infer causality, and figure out if the thing you're doing is actually influencing the outcomes that you care about. If you can do that, you're in a much better position to iterate and succeed, because no one ever gets it right the first time, right? Unless you're extremely lucky.
Course. I think this is something a lot of people struggle to wrap their head around is that experimentation and A/B testing are separate components. We can still do experimentation. We can have the closed loop without it being an A/B test. And I know a lot of people I've talked to struggle to grasp that. I think there's a lot of over analyzing that may occur. And overthinking some of this stuff. Like, look, speed is key. Being able to iterate is key and getting these things rolled out. So I think, I think that was a good explanation. That like when we say experimentation, we're not talking about just A/B testing. Certainly part of it, but it's a much larger topic than that.
And the advantage too of taking that approach is that you can progress your way through a lot of these larger initiatives in much smaller increments. So rather than getting into analysis paralysis, building out the perfect predictive expected revenue model, bringing a ton of data scientists, cleaning up everything and rolling and taking, months or years to roll something out, you can work your way through this if, as you go through it, you're also validating what you do and that it's having the impact that you want to. So you can start with just simple gating, ungating, then you can start looking at it by gating, ungating experiments. Then you can start running those experiments by stage in the funnel. Then you can look at rolling out and experimenting with a new content engagement score, new account and lead scoring, better data collection. Ultimately, move your way towards things like the predictive expected revenue, or and or multi-touch attribution, and deliver those in much more incremental, value-driven ways, as opposed to that big bang of trying to get it all right in one huge project that comes with a lot of risk.
Sure. Sure. Okay, so yeah, let me hop in here. Let's go back to just like getting this ball rolling. I think most folks listening will either have all their content gated with kind of full lead forms, 8 to 9 fields. Others may have it ungated. So I think the like initial approach here is simply for users who, or for companies that are already using a full gated mechanism. Try some of these different approaches. Remove some form fields. Try different trigger mechanisms, whether it's the soft gating, teasers, things of that nature, and just kind of get a read. But we certainly, we're big proponents of just doing the thing, like not spending too much time thinking about it, and kind of while that ball is rolling, we can start layering on some of these additional complexities in terms of the data audit, data analysis, exploration, and things like that.
So here's a question for you. Let's say I'm a company that has all of my content gated, and I listen to David and I say, great, especially top of the funnel, we should start ungating some of this content. And we want to test that, obviously, because we're data-driven, experiment-driven marketers. But all of a sudden you've taken my gate away. What are the sort of things I should be measuring to know if that test is effective? If when I ungate that content, if I'm still getting engagement, if that works for me, and that's a strategy I should pursue.
Sure. So, with anything we do, we always, whether it's the deciding KPI or not is irrelevant, but we're always looking at the pipeline metrics. So in this case, since it's not a traditional A/B test, we'd still want to be kind of viewing week over week, month over month, qualified leads, opportunity values, pipeline things, or excuse me, revenue things like that. And then at the top of the funnel, kind of more of what we sometimes define as like the story-based metrics that help kind of explain why we're seeing this more down funnel behavior. But things like how many content pieces have been viewed, engagement time, scroll depth, bounce rate, things like that, and that at least gives some tangible metric to build, to further kind of build on. But that's where I would start. I would keep it fairly as simple as possible.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would add there?
So if I understand you correctly, you definitely want to keep an eye on your down funnel metrics, and making sure that you haven't affected those or ideally improve them. But because those take some time to unfold and they're lower volume, you also want to be looking at like engagement behavior. Are they actually scrolling and viewing and engaging with this ungated content? And potentially, does it actually increase the amount of gated content further down the funnel if you take that strategy, that they do fill out a form for?
Precisely. And here's where there's some nuance, and we move into the a separate discussion category of internal politics. We deal with this quite often, marketing teams and sales teams. So if we shut off, whether it's a valuable or not, lead source by ungating some of these content pieces, like how we need to take into consideration sales leaders freaking out about it kind of overnight. So, part of this as well is like the internal relationships and having at least a champion sales leader as part of this discussion early on in strategy, just so they're aligned and kind of on board, and being able to share some of these engagement metrics, etc., can help dissuade any initial discomfort the sales team might be feeling, because a lot of people, a lot of companies still are lead gen heavy. They haven't kind of fully transitioned yet to more of a revenue specific shared KPI approach. So yeah, it's just it popped up, and something that is, the thing is important, like what we're doing, but also the internal battles and being able to tell that story is equally important, if not more, especially depending on your company size. Like obviously startups and small business, maybe mid-market, easier to get some of this out the door. If it enterprise, it's need to be more sophisticated with how we roll this out.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're touching on something important here, which is lead quality. So, because we work in B2B, we hear not infrequently from clients that, it's actually more about the lead quality than it is the quantity. And that's, CRO historically has been very focused on just more quantity, right? Because you're looking at conversion rate and assuming all the leads are the same. So I think you can't really assess, or it's hard to assess lead quality without engaging sales into that process. So how have we, I know you have some examples of this, but like how have we like gotten a read from some of the experiments that we've done from like the SDRs or BDRs who are actually talking to the leads and making sure we're if not we're not negatively impacting sales quality, but hopefully actually like improving lead quality.
Improving it. Yeah, I mean, really this all builds upon just having the foundational measurement in place of down funnel impact. Because you're right, like traditionally, most marketers have optimized towards leads, things you can measure out of the box in Google Analytics and such. Uh, and that has certainly, whether it worked or not in the past, who knows? But that's was kind of the mindset, and it still is. So, and creating, and there's some data engineering work involved, but enabling the attribution of everything we do to some of these down funnel classifications, MQLs, SQLs, etc., is extremely vital. We've actually, excuse me, we've also found that in these with these initiatives that do have a high impact to sales, we could say, like individual sales teams, a biweekly kind of check-in can be extremely beneficial, not just on like the relationship aspect, but to gather that qualitative data from the sales leader and kind of his team members, on kind of what they're seeing, what they're experiencing, actual transcripts. I mean, in this day and age with all the transcripts logs, it's fairly trivial to go through, comb through everything and kind of pick out some of these qualitative patterns that might arise. But I think just to summarize that, like being able on the marketing side, being able to attribute and actually basing your success based on some of these down funnel attributions, opportunity values, qualified leads, etc. And then layering on that qualitative aspect of feedback from sales and the sales interactions they're having with the prospects.
Yeah, so for this level of sort of experimentation, I mean, what groups in the organization need to be involved? Um, I think what you're saying is it's a combination of definitely marketing, demand gen, obviously the technical enablers, marketing and revenue ops, but then also potentially the sales team, and teams if we're back to the gating and ungating of content and the role of content in the customer journey. Are we missing anyone else?
Not that I could think of, but I think that that helps illustrate that this is not a initiative to be made by one. It's not a siloed effort. This is a transformational strategy for the company, and all these relevant parties need to be tied in, not just to enable it, but also to help understand and dictate the success.